Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. It is once again me, Zach, here with another Deep Rock Galactic tier list for you guys. Today, we're going to be talking about grenades. Or throwables. Whichever. Quick disclaimer before we get into it, as always with these tier lists, everything is usable. You can win with all the things if you're good enough. So, while this is a decent little guideline, if you've played a lot, you probably don't need this. Frankly. Maybe you're like me and you just enjoy the discussion to be had. Totally acceptable. But I just want to clarify before we go any further, again, as I do with every tier list, this is only my opinion, and in addition, it's not word of God, clearly, so take what you like, use what you like. There are some of these grenades that we'll talk about that are quite good that I just don't like using. I will try to rank them fairly, but, keep that in mind. I will also say, I don't really think there will be anything in the D tier. We could just delete it. I could do it now. I've done it. It's finished. Because frankly, I don't think there's any of these are terrible. I don't think there's any terrible weapons in this game. I would say that C tier is mid. It's maybe tricky to get some value out of. It's maybe not the best option at all times, but it's usable and it's even good, especially in certain circumstances. Anybody who's played this game a lot probably knows which grenade is going to be going in C tier. We'll get there though. So we're going to be starting with the driller. And the first driller grenade is legitimately one of the best grenades / throwables in the game. It's the impact axe. It's fantastic. You get 8 of them. Killing stuff with it counts as killing via melee, which means that it procs the vampire perk if you are running it, which you should on driller especially. And it has an arc to the throw, but it's not that bad. It's pretty easy to get used to, meaning it's actually half good against flying enemies. Now, of course, the higher difficulties you get, and on certain hazard, well, not hazard types, but like modifiers, if you get like 15 flying enemies, axes aren't going to be doing a ton. They might help, but they won't be that useful overall. However, it is okay against single targets, flying or otherwise, just kind of depending on the situation. There is an animation cancel you can do with it, which will allow you to spam out damage even faster with this grenade, which can be pretty handy against certain things. It's just good. It fills in the weakness in quotation marks here, of the driller. The driller has great area denial. He's got great area of effect. Suffers a little bit against large single targets like oppressors and stuff that he can't kill quickly. But with the impact axe, you get behind an oppressor or something like that, you chuck a bunch of axes at his ass, he probably goes down pretty quickly. Overall, pretty decent axe. Next up is the high explosive grenade, the HE grenade. This bad boy right here. It is, in my opinion, a solid B tier. It's not quite C tier. The weakness of the HE grenade, and I think the reason why a lot of people don't run it, is actually because it's kind of unnecessary. Again, the driller's strengths are in area of effect, right? He has got big, massive area that he covers with goop, with fire, with ice, whatever. So having a grenade that is functionally just a normal frag grenade from any other video game, it's nice, but it's nothing too special overall. You get a fair few of them, and you can cook them in your hand, so that if you're pretty decent with them, you can again use this to clear out flying enemies pretty easily. It's honestly not that difficult to do, but you are giving up access to the axes, as well as at least one other grenade that we have to talk about from the driller. So I can't in good conscience put it any higher than B tier, frankly. I like it. I've been running it a lot recently, actually, with a snowball cryo cannon build, just because it's neat, and I think it's the higher the has level, the more you will see this grenade actually start to shine, and I think that that's pretty cool. But it's B tier. It's mid. It's not terrible. but I don't hate it. I used to hate it, but no longer. Next up we have Neurotoxin. Neurotoxin is, I think, one of the most slept-on grenades in the video game, frankly. It is a massive area of, well, neurotoxin, poison, basically. It slows enemies, it does a ton of damage, and you can use basically any fire move to explode the entire area. It lasts for quite a while. The tricky thing about the neurotoxin grenade is that, unfortunately, it takes a second or two to actually start spreading the gas. I think it's like 2 seconds is how long it takes for the gas to spread across its admittedly massive area of effect. It's pretty good. It's great for locking down choke points. If you know where enemies are spawning from or something, you can chuck this down on them. And the weakening effect that it has on bugs, you know, chipping their health down while they run at you, combined with these, you know, little bit of a slow that it provides, it's just really good. I run it with Sludge Pump a lot, but it is usable with any grenade. You have to be careful with the flamethrower, but it is still quite good. It's not hard to throw it in an area where you are not going to be putting down sticky flames, and you can avoid blowing it up until such time as you want to. You only get 4 of them, which is kind of low for the driller's grenades, but that is because it's the largest area of effect, I think, of any of the grenades in the game, really. It's massive. I'm going to put it in A tier. I honestly see arguments for S tier with the neurotoxin. I legitimately think that it is incredible. Axes, universally good. Every driller build benefits from having axes. Neurotoxin, a little bit more specific. It is trickier to use when you have flamethrower equipped. You also have to be careful with certain EPC builds and stuff like that, obviously. But I do think that overall, it helps the driller double down on his strengths, which maybe is not great. In multiplayer, it can be really good because you have maybe a scout or a gunner or even an engineer to, you know, kill big single targets for you. So then you just go all out on the area denial. But even without that, even in solo, I've run it dozens of times. I think it's great. Absolutely fantastic. Next up, we got the Rippers, and they're going in C tier. They are the C tier grenade. It's unfortunate. They have a lot of little quirks. I'll try to cover them relatively quickly and not dwell on them too much. But one thing that is a weird quirk about them, they follow terrain, right? They roll forward, cutting enemies up as they go through, right? Which is neat in concept. The problem is that in large open rooms, this means that you throw it down, it rolls through a bunch of bugs, and then disappears into the distance, never to be seen again, until it cuts your scout in half halfway across the map, which, you know, is hilarious, but not super helpful. So it has the effect that something like an HE grenade would have, or an impact axe, and some of the other axes, some of the other grenades that we have later on in the list as well, where it kills a group of bugs for you, and you're like, well, that's kind of good enough. Unfortunately, it counts as explosive damage, which quite a few things resist. And I mean, yeah, it's a grenade, so of course explosion damage makes sense. Quite a few of the grenades on this list don't do explosive damage, though, like the impact axe or the neurotoxin. So it's competing with HE grenades pretty directly. And unlike the HE grenades that can be used against things that are flying, and flying enemies are often a weakness of the driller, you know, if you're not running EPC within containment field, or you're not good with it, or you're out of ammo, or you just don't want to have to expend that resource at that time, you know, HE grenades give you an option. Even the impact axes, again, give you a anti-flying option. Ripper does not. Ripper drops off real hard because it doesn't start doing things until it hits the ground. In addition to that quirk, if you throw it in a tunnel or something, right, it will obviously follow the curvature of the tunnel and just kind of spin in place. That's the famous thing about the Ripper. You've probably seen clips of it or done it yourself if you fucked with this grenade at all. It can kill functionally an infinite number of weak enemies, right? But it will only deal a certain amount of damage. to a specific enemy. Meaning if a Praetorian walks into it, it may only spin 2 or 3 times around that tunnel before the grenade wears off early, because it will have reached an arbitrary number within the game. I can't remember exactly what it is offhand. It's like 700 or something. It will reach that damage number, and then it will stop. It will break automatically. So, again, unlike the neurotoxin, which also has the same kind of toss in a tunnel entrance and it will deal tons of damage to things that walk through it, it doesn't deal an astronomical amount of damage. It only deals a little bit, and the damage is explosive, so it will be resisted by those larger targets. I think that the Ripper is usable. I want to make that clear. C tier is not D tier, right? There is no D tier grenade. I do think that it's fine. I've used it in quite a few missions, and some of the complaints people have, like the excessive friendly fire damage and stuff, have either been nerfed or it's kind of user error, right? I've hit myself with it a few times, but never so much that I drop dead. So if you're having that issue, practice more. Get creative with placements. If you have an engineer friend, you can toss it on a platform and it will spin around the platform just until it, runs out, which is hilarious and great. But it is a bit weak. It doesn't really fill in any of your weaknesses. It doesn't give you anything that you couldn't do in a different way. Like, why throw down the Ripper when you could just shoot some goo at the tunnel, or put down sticky flames, or throw down a neurotoxin, or anything else. It doesn't have the immediate, toss it out and something dies, regardless of where it's at, that the HE grenades have, because it's landlocked. It only affects grounded enemies, unless, the flying enemy is hanging out near the wall. Which, again, HE grenade would take that out just as effectively, right? There's basically no scenario where the Ripper is just the best option available out of the Driller's grenades. It's not that it's not usable, it's just never the top dog, and that's a bit of a bummer, I think. Because it is a very cool weapon, and it's very fun to throw at things. But, let's move along. Next up we've got the Engineer. The Engineer has the grenades that I have the most experience with because I'm an Engineer main. So, let's talk about them. We're starting with the Lure, which is the grenade that the NG starts with at the very beginning of the game. The Lure attracts up to 10 bugs to it, with a dancing dwarf. This is one of those things that is a little bit deceptive, because it seems as though that wouldn't be all that good, right? Only 10 bugs, the higher the has you go, the more bugs there are, and who buddy, at a certain point 10 is a real drop in the bucket kind of number. But it will continue to attract bugs if you kill the bugs that are there. So this allows you to do a lot of cool things with the Shard Diffractor. You could do like Plashcrete Catalyst, throw down a platform near the Lure, and then hit the laser on it, and any bugs that come up to the Lure will get disintegrated. The new Turret Arc rework overclock microconductors, that one as well. You can put lightning down on platforms and stuff near the Lure, kill the bugs while they're attacking it. And of course, Fat Boy. You can chuck a Fat Boy down, kill a bunch of bugs, throw the Lure into the pit, and a bunch of other bugs will then walk in and get irradiated and killed by it. It's great. I'm going to put it in A tier. I think that it's one of those grenades that most people think is like kinda good, but when you are first starting out, you might think it's a little bit weak because it doesn't kill stuff directly, and then once you've played for a while longer, you kind of come back around to it. I am a big fan. Next up is Plasma Burster. Plasma Burster fills a very weird kind of role for the Engineer, because Lure and Proximity Mines both act as area denial and crowd control, while the Shredders and the Plasma Burster are kind of for self-defense more than anything. Plasma Burster throws out a grenade that explodes 4 times as it bounces around. This is one of those grenades that you will probably hurt yourself with a lot when you first start fucking around with it, because the bounce is kind of weird, and you might throw it into a wall and it will bounce off and explode 3 times on your face, and everybody will laugh. Haha, hee hee. I'm gonna put this in B tier. This one is a great option for something that the engineer can occasionally struggle with, which is self-defense. If enemies run up on him, he can occasionally struggle to keep them away from him, depending on his build and his loadout. If you're running Breach Cutter, you're completely safe no matter where you're at, and some of his other weapons can also help, but regardless, if you are jumped by a group of bugs, or you end up out of position, or something like that, Plasma Burster is a nice panic button. You turn, look at the swarm, chuck a grenade into it, half of it dies instantly, and you run away. It's great. It is a little bit outshone by the other options because I do think that the engineer has a fantastic layout of grenades. And speaking of that, next up is the proximity mine. Proximity mines are, I think, a contender for S tier. I'm not going to put them there, but I think you could make that argument. The reason I wouldn't put them there is that there are quite a few missions and playstyles that favor much higher mobility, in which case proximity mines gets a little bit less value. Sometimes. There are just certain mission types where you won't get as much out of it, where you're moving around a lot, or where you don't want to be sitting still, or where you are sitting still but the area is relatively restricted. Overall, though, I think 99% of missions and most engineer playstyles benefit from proximity mines. You do, of course, have to be careful about placing these mines in a place where your team will get exploded by them, but, again, I'm not going to rate grenades based off of user error. That would be a bit unfair to them. Each proximity mine will blow up 3 times, and if it does not blow up, you can pick it back up and move it. Meaning you can do a slightly lighter weight version of what the impact axes do, where if you haven't used all of them, you throw them down, resupply, and then later you can come back and pick them back up. It's pretty cool. You can also just huck them down in random places where you think bugs might spawn or might come from, and it might wipe out most of the wave on its own. Sometimes at higher Haz levels, because bugs are quite a bit faster, they will kind of run through the proximity mines, and that can be a bit of a pain. But generally, if it's a big group of bugs, the bugs at the front who might run through it successfully will simply trigger it for the bugs who come after, thereby still killing half the wave. It's just the back half instead. They're great. You can legitimately wipe low Haz waves entirely with proximity mines. Like Haz 4 waves, with clever positioning, pretty much the entire wave can be wiped out with just 3 or 4 of these mines. Big fan. Now finally we got the little rippers. The little robots, and they're going in S tier. I don't think that'll surprise anyone. The rippers are the most brainless grenade that the engineer has access to. You throw them down, and then the little robots run off and beat things to death for you in dark alleys. It's great. They are very solid as self-defense, in the same vein as the Plasma Burster, but because they have really good range, they can affect a huge area of the map. Overall, I would say they are better at self-defense, again, than the Plasma Bursters. Now, I think you get like 6 Plasma Bursters, so that is, that's a point in their favor. You only get 4 Rippers. But being able to walk into a room, chuck a bunch of robots into it, and then just kind of wait and see what they kill, that's nice. That's a good quality of life kind of defense, you know what I mean? I don't think it'll surprise anyone to see them in S tier. They are great. I will say, they won't always get you as many kills, necessarily. They might get bogged down fighting one larger enemy, slowly beating it to death. Or they might kill a bunch of tiny babies, but not kill a bunch of grunts or slashers or something. It is still the AI, you are kind of putting your faith in them. But it is just so simple to use and yet still so effective that I definitely think it's worthwhile to take. And the best part is, the most important thing, it synergizes well with every single engineer loadout. Like, there is no engineer build where you're like, oh man, it would be bad to take the Rippers. There might be builds where you're like, oh, the lure would be better, or maybe I'd prefer proximity mines, but you're pretty much never going to go wrong taking the Ripper. And, I mean, that makes it S tier. It's in the same vein as impact axes, you know? Like, every build will benefit from having this grenade around. Also, they are adorable, and you can smack them around a little bit, and that's great. 10 out of 10. Perfect grenade. So next up, we're going to be moving on to the Gunner class. Now, the Gunner has what I would say are kind of the most uninteresting seeming grenades. They're not actually uninteresting, but they kind of have that vibe. They definitely are the most grenadey grenades of all the grenades, for sure. Starting off with Sticky Grenade. Sticky Grenade is ye old reliable. I believe you get 6 of them. They explode for a good amount of damage, and they have a fear effect, so that when you chuck them at something's face, it's pretty likely that that thing is going to run away in terror for the duration of the grenade. And I think overall this grenade is a very solid B tier. It's reliable, it's quite good, it deals pretty good damage. The fear is something that a lot of people talk about screwing them over a lot. I've heard a lot of people who've made other tier lists or who just play the game a lot who are talking about it say that the sticky grenade, the bugs will run in weird directions and not explode in a group or something like that. I have not really had that experience. Maybe it's, you know, personal preference entirely, but generally I've had only good things happen with the fear effect from the sticky grenade. I think the worst thing that could happen is if you wait until the enemy is too close to throw it at their face, and then when they run away, they run at you, and then you blow yourself up. But even then, I've never really had that happen personally, at least not to a significant amount. So, I wouldn't say they're the best in all situations. I think the sticky grenade is the least specialized of the grenades that the gunner has access to. And for that reason, I'm rating them not low, but a solid, very solid B tier. Next up is Incendiary Grenade, and I'm going to actually put this one in B tier as well. Incendiary Grenade is great. It's the best area denial tool that the gunner has access to outside of his shield, obviously, and definitely the best area denial grenade that he has. It creates a big blanket explosion of fire. Sorry, I shouldn't say explosion. It basically lights an area on fire, which is pretty good, pretty effective. If used well against robots, this will blow them up. If used against large groups of enemies, this will not only burn the ones who are in the area, but will also, of course, they will go and light their friends on fire afterwards as well. In addition, it has a weird kind of effect that isn't really talked about very much, where enemies will try to path around the fire. So if you throw this in the mouth of a tunnel, and they have no way around it, they will walk through it. But if you throw it, say, in a large open room, the bugs might try to walk around it rather than through it. So if you don't hit them directly, it may do a little bit less damage, but it is worth noting that causing the enemy to take longer to get to you is still a useful tool in your kit, right? It works like the repellent additive of the engineer a little, but with the added caveat that if they do step on it, they, of course, are lit on fire, which is pretty cool. The downside of this grenade compared to the other grenades that the gunner has, including the sticky grenades, is that it's difficult to get good value against flying targets for pretty obvious reasons. It has to kind of coat the ground or the walls with fire, meaning, again, it's not as effective at denying an area as, say, the neurotoxin grenade, which creates a very large cloud, and even the proximity mine, which has a kind of a dome of effect around itself, where even if an enemy flies into it, they will explode. But again, if used in tight quarters, caves and such, it will hit flying enemies, and it will do quite a bit of damage. It's also particularly effective against things like robots for obvious reasons, raising the heat and stuff. And it's another option for proccing volatile bullets on the Bulldog, which is one of the stronger overclocks that the gunner has, let alone that the bulldog specifically has. So overall, it's a really solid option. It's kind of situational. If you think you're going to be fighting in big open caves, maybe you don't take this one. And the problem with it is that the other two are sort of more generically applicable, I guess. And speaking of the other two, Cluster Grenade. Cluster Grenades are going straight to A tier. I think you could argue they're S tier. But I'm going to put them in A tier because I will say, much like the Incendiary Grenade, if an enemy is flying or is on a wall, it can be kind of weird to hit them with this. However, outside of that, the Cluster Grenade is good in every single situation. It not only does it do a lot of damage, it will wipe out weak enemies en masse, exactly what you want a grenade to do, of course, but in addition, it explodes into a bunch of bomblets. And when those bomblets explode, they also will stun things, meaning that it is both a heavy damage and also a pretty solid crowd control tool, which can be very helpful, especially on certain builds where maybe you want to peel enemies off of yourself a little bit better, that kind of thing. The only reason, again, it's not going up top is because against certain enemies it doesn't really do anything, and it doesn't... It's good in basically every situation, but it doesn't have any particular situation where it is by far the best, except when there are roughly 8 billion bugs. And, I mean, that's pretty cool, but the final option, which is the Lead Burster, is the S tier pick, and not because it's necessarily the best at everything, but because it's the best at a couple things. It has the same flexibility that Cluster Grenade has, where you can take it into any mission and you know it's going to probably be pretty useful. Cluster Grenade, though, is good when dealing with swarms of bugs, large numbers of angry insects trying to punch your face out through your asshole, right? The Lead Burster is good for a whole bunch of other stuff. You can chuck it into a room you haven't explored yet, and it will clear out a bunch of stuff for you basically for free. You can throw it underneath a bulk and do roughly 1 billion damage to a bulk. Like, 1 or 2 Lead Bursters will mostly or fully kill a bulk detonator, which is a ton of ammo saved for the rest of your team, as well as yourself even. It's a relatively low opportunity cost for that kind of massive payoff. In addition, it's the only grenade the gunner has, except arguably Sticky Grenade, that is consistently good against flying enemies. You can chuck this out when a bunch of Mactera spawn and wipe out most of the swarm pretty easily. It will clear out babies, which are sometimes a problem for the gunner depending on your build. If you've got like minigun but you don't have Hellfire, or Burning Hell I should say, it can be painful to kill swarmers. This helps with that kind of stuff. It's just generically all the time good, and is also specifically pretty good against dreadnoughts and bulks, like bigger enemies that would normally be real bullet sponges for you. Which is why I say it is S tier, but I don't think that any of the gunner's grenades are that much better than the others. I've been running Incendiary a lot recently, for instance. But let's finish this off with the final tier of grenades. We're going to be starting with the IFG. These are Scouts grenades, I almost forgot to mention that. IFG is a complicated little grenade. It doesn't really do any damage, but it increases the damage that anybody does to the bugs inside of it by, I believe, 30%. In addition, it applies a non-damaging electrical effect to the bugs, which allows you to proc things like Bullets of Mercy and other effects from other classes who might benefit from an enemy being electrified. And in addition, they are slowed heavily. I forget the exact amount offhand, but it's like 50% or something. The IFG suffers mostly from the fact that it has kind of a smaller area than maybe you would want, but the effect that it has is so powerful, I think it more than makes up for it. It is historically considered quite good into things like Dreadnought fights, because you toss this down on the Dreadnought and your team does more damage to it when the weak point opens. It's good in tight corridors and stuff where you know that the bugs are going to be coming down one specific hallway. You just toss down the IFG and then you're good. It is overall very solid. I will be putting it in A tier. It is, I think, overshadowed by the fact that Scout has the best grenades in the game. This grenade is better than a lot of these other ones we just talked about, but Scout has the two strongest grenades, of course, arguably, in the video game, which kind of leads to it being a little, like the IFG specifically being a little bit meh, you know? And speaking of another crazy powerful grenade, we have the Cryo Grenade. Now this is S tier. I don't think that this will surprise anyone. Cryo Grenade is not a must pick by any means, but it is really, really good, and it allows you to do things with the Scout that would otherwise be very difficult to do, either for the Scout or for the team. 2 Cryo Grenades will instantly freeze, like most enemies, really? And you can throw it at groups of Mactera that are flying in and instantly kill them because flying enemies immediately die. It can even technically be used against bosses and stuff, though I don't think that's as common as the other uses. You only get 4 of them, but I mean they are 4 really powerful grenades. It is definitely worth it. Overall, they have they're probably the second best crowd control options in the game, beating out most other classes' options. Cryo grenades are great. The only reason why they are not the best grenade in the video game is because pheromone canisters exist, and we're going to skip to that one real quick and put that in S tier as well. Because pheromone canisters cause the bugs to start fighting each other. Chuck this into a massive swarm and watch the swarm tear itself apart. This is really good because the downside of Cryo Grenade, and it's a very small downside that doesn't matter much, is you still have to kill the thing that's frozen unless it's a flying enemy, right? So if you throw this into the middle of a big swarm of enemies, you still have to shoot them. You just save ammo overall. But with the pheromone canister, you don't even have to shoot most of the bugs. They'll kill each other, and that's awesome. Also, unlike most other crowd control options like the lure, or even to some extent the cryo cannon itself, pheromone canister has like functionally infinite like effectiveness, because you can throw this on a really tough enemy and it will kill potentially dozens of smaller, weaker enemies over the course of its life as a pheromone target. Now, the reason why pheromone canister is not an auto pick, despite how powerful it is, there's a couple reasons. One, your teammates may not notice the delicate piss glow that surrounds pheromone targets, and they might just empty clip after clip into the horde of glyphids, desperately trying to kill the bugs that would have killed each other without any kind of interference, right? So if you don't think that your team is going to pay attention to that kind of stuff, you might get more value out of Cryo Grenade, or even IFG to help your team punch stuff better, right? In addition, Pheromone Canister is not good in every single, mission type. Obviously, IFG is arguably better in a lot of Dreadnought missions, if you're just trying to, be as effective as possible. And of course, there is the fact that while you do get 4 of these grenades, and they do go pretty far, you do only get 4 of them. Only 4. And that maybe is a problem. They also aren't as good in some situations against groups of flying enemies. If 400 Mactera fly into a relatively tight area, 2 or 3 cryo grenades will kill all of them. But Pheromone Canister might have more difficulty with that. Right? And in addition, depending on the type of bugs that are spawning, you may not have great pheromone targets. A swarm or swarm, I guess. Yeah, a swarm or swarm. That's a good word. It's worthless to try and pheromone them, right? Why would you bother? In that situation, IFG would be vastly superior, I would say. Um, but even Cryo Grenade might be more useful, debatably. So it's far from the best weapon in the entire video game or anything, but I would argue that these two grenades are the strongest ones in the game. And yeah, I don't really think there's a whole lot of argument to be made about that. Now, the final one is kind of interesting, and when I started this tier list, I said there was only one C tier grenade, but I do actually think I've mentally convinced myself that the boomerang does go into C tier. The boomerang is, I think, a tiny bit, unfairly maligned. A lot of people say, or I shouldn't say a lot of people, but I've definitely heard people say that the boomerang is the worst grenade in the entire game. And I don't think that's true. I think the Ripper is worse overall, but not by a ton. And the reason I think that is because when you're playing as the Scout, your primary focus is going to be completing the objective, collecting minerals. Killing bugs is kind of a distant secondary hobby of yours. It's not that you're terrible at it, it's just generally your role is aimed at something a little bit different. If you are killing stuff, it's usually high value, high priority targets that you're killing with the M1000, basically. The boomerang kind of falls into this weird self-defense category, which it's okay at. It has the longest stun in the game. It's 8 seconds, which is crazy. But it has a limited number of targets that it can affect. I'm double checking here exactly how many it can hit, and that number is 9. You get 8 of the grenades, which is the same as impact axes. But even with that, like, what is that, 72? That's like a good amount of bugs. 72 is a good amount over the course of 2 or 3 swarms. But while it is a good length of time for the stun, the damage is only 35 electric damage baseline, which isn't anything crazy. Now, it does electrify things, so again, you can get your Bullets of Mercy proccing off of this. But as you can probably already, like, you might already be thinking to yourself, IFG does this, but an infinite number of bugs can walk through IFG's effect over the course of its lifetime. Whereas there is a hard limit to how many of these will be able to go out at a time. The reason I say it's unfairly maligned and not, woefully inadequate is because if what you're using it for is a quick oh fuck moment where 6 Mactera have cornered you as the Scout and all your shit's on cooldown, you just hit G and the stun sweeper goes out on its own and stuns all 6 of those guys and 3 extra somewhere else for free instantly with very, very little aiming. It's almost aimbot. So, like, that's not terrible. That might buy you the breathing room you need to survive. 8 seconds is enough time to kill all 6 of those Mactera and the 3 extra guys and probably some other dudes you found. So, I kind of get the concept that they're going for with this, but it suffers from multiple problems. The biggest one is we have 2 S-tier scout grenades. 2. And the other grenade is an A tier, and it's very high A tier. What the fuck is this going to do compared to those things, Like, what is a mediocre self-defense tool in comparison to 3 of the best grenades in the video game, right? Like, we're not comparing between classes, but these 3 are all crazy strong. It's pretty universally acknowledged. This one just helps protect you a smidge, and that's cool, but I think that will always kind of lean people's bias towards these and away from this. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I can't really deny the fact that this does very little damage and doesn't crowd control effectively enough to make up for it. It just doesn't affect enough things. Because you could hit, like, 9 normal grunts, and then a slasher just walks up to you, you know? It's, meh. That's basically it. It's meh. I'm pretty sure that even swarmers and, like, Nadasite babies and stuff will count as hits for this. So while it's okay for clearing out small groups of those guys because it insta-kills them, the fact remains that after it hits 9 swarmers, it stops existing. That's not really a great usage of your grenades, you know? And, like, yeah, you could just not use it against swarmers, but you don't get to target everything that it hits. If even 2 or 3 of the bounces are on swarmers because there were swarmers in the swarm of enemies you threw it at, you just kind of have to eat shit. You don't get a cool boomerang move. I don't know. I don't really know how to fix the boomerang. I've played around with it a fair bit. I like that it is... It's fun to hit G a lot in the caves because it comes back to you if it doesn't hit enemies, and that's fun. That's neat. That's good gameplay. But I don't really know how to fix it outside of that, or if Ghost Ship even considers it something that needs fixing. I think the Ripper needs help pretty obviously, because it just is wonky to use at the best of times, even if you're trying to get value out of its rather limited scope of abilities. Whereas the Stun Sweeper, it feels like it's a numerical problem. You know, maybe if it did more damage, it would be better, because maybe then it would fit better into the kind of high priority target assassination that the Scout, you know, wants to do. Maybe if it did melee damage so that you could possibly use it to get Vampire at range, that would be sort of funny. I don't know. Overall, it's just meh across the board. I don't think it's terrible. I was originally going to make an argument for being at very, very low B tier, because having that panic button that you just hit and there's an 8-second stun on whatever was about to smack you, that's conceptually cool to me. But overall, I couldn't do it. I just couldn't think. Comparing it to, like, Incendiary or Sticky or Plasma, I look at those and I'm like, those are really good grenades. I like using those. This one, I like using it, but I acknowledge that it's not that great. So, I don't know. Either way, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Hopefully we get some good discussion on this one. I enjoyed making it. I really enjoy all of the grenades in Deep Rock. You may have noticed that most of them are S or A tier, and the B tier ones were all kind of just situationally great, basically. Because I love them. The best overall grenades belong to the Scout, who's got 2 in S and 1 in A. The worst overall grenades go to the Gunner, because he's got 2 in B, 1 in A, 1 in S. And the Driller is definitely the most balanced, because he's got 1 in every tier. It's kind of funny that that's how that worked out, because all I was really thinking is at least 1 grenade from each class in S tier, and yet Driller's just straight down. Either way, don't let this tier list discourage you from using any of the grenades. Even the ones that are a little bit weak can be made to be very effective. I messed around with the Ripper for basically an entire week of gameplay. Just every night getting on, playing Driller, running around with the Rippers, trying to get value out of them. I didn't find anything too crazy cool that I could do that would make me want to equip them often, but I did learn that they are fun. And the same is kind of true with the Boomerang. I ran around with that for quite a while as Scout and just had a great time. So, you know, find what niche you fill as a player, and then pick your grenade based off of that. Cater it to your build. There's tons of options. But, for now, thank you guys for watching. Next tier list video is probably going to be the weapons tier list, and then we'll start moving into the overclocks after that. I already recorded a weapons tier list, but I just wasn't really happy with it. I thought some of my opinions were kind of stupid, or I should say, poorly explained. So I'm going to redo that one, and that'll come out later this week. And then after that, again, overclocks at some point. But for now, thanks for watching. Don't forget, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And until next time, Peace.